Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. First question. Hey Jason, XFit gets a negative press for bad form and injuries. In terms of the long-term health of connective tissue, ligaments, tendons, etc., is this type of training style something you would be strongly against doing, or do you see some benefits to it for fitness? Thanks. Alright, yes, I'm going to call it XFit instead of the other name, the other word that some people call it as, simply because a certain company owns that name and they can sue you for copyright for even saying it in a YouTube video without permission, and they spend a lot of money doing so. So we're going to call it XFit. Now, that being said, what do I think about it as far as overall health? Well, the problem is that what you're thinking of is the really crazy stuff you guys see people do online. What you do need to understand, it varies a lot from box to box. Some of the boxes will absolutely injure you. They will hurt you for life. The stuff you see at the actual games, a lot of what the people do is acceptable form, will injure you. There are boxes that coach technique and form a lot, and they don't do as much of the crazy stuff, so it really depends upon the individual coaches at the box, and I've known people who've gone to both types. A lot of the really trendy ones, though, that don't have actual skilled coaches who understand Olympic lifting are probably dangerous. And the real things, the things that are going to hurt you with this style of training are going to be doing really high rep Olympic lifts. You have no business performing highly technical explosive lifts for high reps. I wouldn't recommend doing more than 5 reps at the most on any of the Olympic lists. If anyone has you doing more than that, they don't know what they're doing. Drop them, get the hell out of there. The same thing with those abominations people are calling kippings or kip ups or whatever they're called. Those things, again, don't do those. I like to call them flop ups, but those will damage your shoulders over time. You have no business doing those at all. They're absolutely absurd. Now, that being said, the other stuff, can GPP work? Be good for your connective tissue? Can squats, can deadlifts be good for your joint health, bones, connective tissue over time? Yes, absolutely. These things will improve your longevity. They will improve your health. And the other stuff that they do will absolutely help you get into shape and will help you have higher quality of life as you get older, as you get middle-aged, as you go into old age, even elderly. Yeah, absolutely. GPP work done with good techniques that aren't going to hurt you. Heavy barbell work to get you stronger over time. Absolutely. Those things can facilitate a greatly improved quality of life, lower disease rates later in life, lower degeneration of your body later in life. They can make you healthier 30 years later than you should have been. Like, you keep your body from degenerating 20 to 30 years slower than it should have had you been sedentary. So all that other stuff has benefits. You should do it. All right, next question. Do you think the stuff going on with Russian athletes for the Rio Olympics is purely political, or have the Russians just become complacent in their doping programs compared to other major nations? I suspect it's a political point scoring against the Russians because there's no way that's the only Russian athletes using PEDs. It's purely political. Do the Russians have a very comprehensive, wide-scale doping program? Yes, absolutely. But then again, so do a lot of other countries. Do they push the bleeding envelope more than some other countries? Yes. Does that mean there's a higher chance of them getting caught? Yes. But the issue you have there is a political one. There's a lot of political bias against Russia right now from certain countries who would have a say in the Olympics overall. The United States, the current administration, a lot of Europe, a lot of Middle Eastern countries, they're all going to have problems with Russia these days, and accordingly there's going to be a strong political bias to try to hammer their athletes. I can assure you the Russian athletes are probably being tested at 5 to 10 times a higher rate than other countries are right now. So if you just increase the frequency, if you increase the frequency of testing tenfold, you're going to catch a lot more athletes. In fact, you might go from catching 0 to catching dozens just by that. So some countries who would be using possibly just as many drugs in their athletes are going to get caught at a 0 rate because the testing is too infrequent and they're smart enough about it. When you're hammering the Russian athletes at 5 or 10 times the normal rate on random tests, you start dramatically increasing the odds of catching one because it doesn't really give them the breaks they need to get around the system the way that everyone else does it. But yeah, there's absolutely a strong political bias going on there. It's not just that the Russians are using more stuff. There is definitely politics at play, and that's what people need to remember. The Olympics have never, ever been just about sports and sportsmanship. They have been, for generations, they have been about warfare, about politics, about world events. They are a form of warfare, and people's biases will come into play. There will be gang tactics used based upon current political trends. Will always be a factor in the Olympics. Always have been, always will be. All right, next question. Hey Jason, you mentioned that by doing the deadlift, you are currently maintaining your leg size. Is this something that will work for everyone? Most people, can you maintain the size of your quads even if you built them doing squats by just doing deadlifts, or is it because you have very good genetics for legs? I'm not going to discount the fact that I do have good genetics for legs. I hate it when guys get up on YouTube and they try to pretend like they have some magic secret to their training, that they have amazing arms or amazing delts because they know some secret training method when they use piss poor training methods. No, it's their genetics oftentimes. Genetics and a little bit of drugs go a really long way. I'm not going to lie. I have ridiculous leg genetics. I might not be gifted in my delts or my biceps or anything else. In fact, far from it. But leg genetics, glutes, quads, hamstrings, calves. I don't even train my calves, and I have like 18, 19-inch calves right now. I haven't trained my calves in 5 years, done a single set for them. So yeah, there is the genetic factor involved. But that being said, or if we're talking about making gains versus just maintaining, yeah, you can use lifts that put a little less indirect stress on certain muscles and keep 100% of your gains from them. Meaning I do 2 exercises that work my legs. I do the deadlift, the conventional deadlift, and I do the push press. And I am maintaining 100% of my leg size, quads, hamstrings, calves, everything just by doing that. Are they getting bigger though? No, they don't appear to be growing. Things like my arms and delts have been growing, but my legs are not growing because I'm not giving them sufficient stimulation to stimulate new growth, but I am certainly maintaining. And that's something that people need to understand. Maintaining size doesn't take as much as people think it does. Meaning if your arms, if your biceps get to a point to where you want them to be and you don't want them any bigger, you could probably do 1 or 2 sets of weighted chin-ups every week as your only bicep exercise, and it will maintain them. Even though a lot of you guys don't think of the chin-up as an amazing bicep exercise, you could probably drop your curls, everything else out, and they'll stay where they are. You'll be able to maintain them easily on that. So it's the same with someone like me who has big legs genetically. Yeah, I can deadlift and push press and maintain them, but most of you could probably do the same thing as well. Just realize that they're not going to be as big as someone who's genetically gifted in that area. But yeah, absolutely. You could use deadlifts and push presses to maintain your leg size if you were happy with them, and cut out squatting and you'd be fine. Just remember that for a lot of guys, your legs may not be as big as you want to believe they are. All right, next question. I've been lifting for 5 years and my fat-free mass index is 22, although not all those years were consistent gains, as I had factors in life that caused me to slow down or even regress my gains at some point. I gained 40 pounds since I started lifting though. I started very skinny and smaller than average person, and also know that some of the weight gain is water and fat even though I'm relatively lean. Do I still have room for a lot of gains, or am I close to reaching a peak? 3 points of fat-free mass index still seems like a lot. All right, I'm going to level with you here. When we talk about that lean fat-free mass index of 25 being the natural limit, we're not talking about every human being on Earth. We're talking about the genetically elite being able to get up to 25. The average Joe might not ever get past 24. Case in point, look at guys like what's his name, Eric Helms, who's been training for over a decade, competing for a decade, has a PhD, and really knows what he's doing. He still sits under 24 as a pro natural bodybuilder. So something you need to keep in mind there when we talk about that, we're talking about the genetically elite. Now, I don't want to upset you here, but if you started way underweight, really skinny, and you've put on 40 pounds already, and stayed fairly lean, you're relatively lean after even 40 pounds of gain, you've probably just about maxed out your gains. You're not going to be in the top 1% who could reach a 25 fat-free mass index drug-free. And that's okay. You've done well for yourself. I'm not saying don't continue to try to progress and make gains, but after 5 years of training, even if you had some regression in here and there, you should have bounced back really quickly and gone right back to making gains. You have probably maxed out 90 to 95% of your lifetime drug-free gains, even though your fat-free mass index is 22. You might be able to get to 22.5. You might be able to even get to 23 if you continue to push it for another 5 years, be consistent. So you can still make gains, but you're not going to put on another 10 pounds of muscle level of gains natural from where you are. It doesn't work that way. You're shooting for, can I gain a pound here, a pound there, a few ounces here, a few ounces there, and continue to make progress. And that's what you should be looking at. Can I make a little more progress next year? Can I make a little more progress next year? Can I gain another pound of muscle next year? And if you can do that, you've been successful. But remember, that fat-free mass index is to indicate what the genetic elite could reach, so that you can set a standard and say, hey, this guy is on gear, or this guy isn't, based upon the fact he's just bigger than even those are good genetics should be able to get. It doesn't mean that even 90% of the population are capable of reaching that limit genetically. Now, that also being said, even keep in mind that those same studies have shown that the average anabolic steroid user has a fat-free mass index of 24.5. So don't feel bad if you have less muscle mass as a drug-free lifter who started really skinny. If you have less muscle mass than the average anabolic steroid user, that's nothing to be upset about. Don't be ashamed of that. You worked hard to be where you are. You put on 40 pounds of mostly muscle, starting very underweight and sickly. So be proud of your progress and look forward to the future and say, okay, but I can gain another pound of muscle here. Maybe next year, maybe another pound the year after that, and just keep moving forward. And it's about the journey, not the destination. Just keep working on your progress and don't worry about the fact of what is your absolute limits, because it's probably going to be lower than you had hoped for. But you know what? Progress is progress. Are you doing better today than you were yesterday? Are you doing better right now than you were a year ago? Well, be proud of yourself then. Keep moving forward. All right, next question. I tend to eat a high fiber and high sugar diet. If the sugar to fiber ratio is 1-to-1, meaning that for every gram of sugar I eat a gram of fiber, does this balance out the negative effects of sugar, or even a high fiber diet? One must consume a conservative amount of sugars. I think you're focusing on the wrong thing here. Most of the negative health effects of sugars come from specifically the sugar fructose, not just the fact that they're sugars. Any other negative health effects you would get from fast absorbing carbs can be balanced out with fiber. So if you're eating a fiber to sugar ratio of 1-to-1, that's insanely high fiber, or you're not eating that high of a sugar diet. Meaning, in order to be eating, like from table sugar, a really dangerous diet, you would have to be eating 100 grams of sugar, because there's 50 grams of fructose in every 100 grams of table sugar. 50 grams of chronic fructose intake a day is the number that we consider to be dangerous to health. When you start reaching that threshold, it starts negatively affecting things like liver enzymes, your triglyceride levels, stuff like that. We've got plenty of data kind of confirming that. So about 50 grams a day, that would be 100 grams of table sugar. To offset that with what you're talking about, that's 100 grams of fiber a day. That's literally like 4 times the recommended healthy amount, which is not saying it's going to be a bad thing if you adapt to it, but that is an insanely high fiber intake. So maybe your numbers aren't as bad as you think they are. Now, again, that being said, what you need to focus on is not the total sugar intake, but the actual total fructose intake. So since you're eating a high fiber diet, you're probably not getting negative effects just from consuming refined carbohydrates like refined sugars, or even, you didn't even say they were refined, you might be eating a really high fruit diet. So a little bit different there. Again, what you need to look at is total fructose intake. So go look at your actual sugar sources and see what percentage of them is coming from fructose, and then calculate it accordingly. And if you're consuming over 50 grams of fructose a day chronically, then you need to cut it back a bit. You need to cut your sugar intake back. So again, to go look at the actual fructose content of each sugar you're eating, it's 55% in high fructose corn syrup, 50% in table sugar. Fruits, it's going to be less than 50%. And you need to just look up the individual fruit. The fructose content or ratios in fruits vary tremendously from fruit to fruit. You'll have to look each individual one up. All right, next question. Jason, longtime subscriber here. How well can someone recomposition in 4 weeks? I've just finished cutting and I'm planning to run a continuous cycle of 8 weeks of bulking and the 4 weeks of recomping. Provided the bulks are slow, is it reasonable to expect to lose all the fat accumulated from the bulk in the recomp period? Thanks and much love. All right, too many variables for me to answer that question, so let's just break it down briefly of what you can do. You need to calculate how much muscle you think you can gain versus how much weight you think you can gain based on your experience level. Now, you know, if you're a novice, you could be gaining up to 2 pounds of muscle a month, but if you're like an intermediate, I'm going to say you're not going to gain more than half a pound of muscle per month under any circumstances. And even then, that might be pushing it. So what I would say is that look at it from the perspective of you're going to stop gaining muscle at a decent rate on a bulk no matter what. And your body will need to reset because you start gaining more fat than muscle very quickly. I think the 8 weeks method is acceptable, but it needs to be something like gaining 1 pound on average per month. Meaning your 8 weeks, you should only gain about 2 pounds if you want to make this method work. If you're, say, an intermediate and you finished out your noob gains, this doesn't matter. Just do a clean bulk all the way through. Gain a pound every month, or 1.5 pounds every month, even up to 2 pounds every month if you're a novice. But if you're an intermediate, shoot for 1 pound of weight gain every single month. That puts you up 2 pounds at the end of that 8 weeks. If you do a recomposition and you only lose 1 pound of fat in there, that's probably acceptable. That should put you right back at keeping your body fat percentage the same over time. Like if you go plot this out over the course of a year and you calculate yourself at 1 pound of weight gain every single month, half of it fat, half of it muscle, you'll find that if you can just recomposition the following month, basically, and just maintain your weight and gain only 0.5 pound of muscle, which means that you've only lost 0.5 pound of fat during that month. If you plot that over the course of a year, I think you're going to find that your body fat percentage will stay the exact same. And anytime you gain several pounds of muscle while maintaining the same body fat percentage, you end up looking slightly leaner at the end. That's something I've discussed in the past for you guys, that when body fat percentage stays the same and there's any significant muscle gain, you actually appear to have recompositioned even if you actually haven't. And it just has to do with the illusion it creates. All right, guys, but that's the end of part 1, and we'll jump over to part 2 next. So I will talk to you guys next time.